August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters. East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl studied the latest intelligence, reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had calculated the logistics of the Allied advance supply lines, stretching over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to General Patton's rapidly advancing Third Army. The conclusion seemed obvious. The Americans had exceeded their supply capacity. Patton's forces would soon stall, in days, perhaps even hours. No army could maintain such a pace without sufficient fuel. From his post at Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters, Jodl evaluated what every experienced German commander already knew. An armored division on the move consumed around 150,000 gallons of fuel per day. With the Americans now operating 400 miles from their supply depots, the outcome appeared certain. Patton's Third Army would have to stop, allowing the Wehrmacht to regroup along the Seine and possibly hold until winter. What Jodl did not realize was that, just 125 miles away, nearly 6,000 trucks were already driving east in an unbroken line, headlights blazing through the night despite standard military caution. They carried more than 12,000 tons of supplies every 24 hours. This was the Red Ball Express, a logistical operation so bold that it defied every principle of conventional military planning and challenged the very foundation of German strategic thought. Within 72 hours, the supposedly stranded American tanks would smash through German positions along the Seine. Within a week, Paris would be liberated. Within a month, U.S. forces would reach the German border. The Wehrmacht's most seasoned strategists were about to learn an unexpected lesson in logistics, one that would reshape their perception of modern warfare. This achievement was made possible by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African American, who turned a one-way road network into the most efficient supply route in military history. The German High Command's belief in an inevitable American logistical collapse was grounded in years of combat experience and reinforced by their own success with blitzkrieg tactics. But what they were about to witness would prove that industrial power, organization, and determination could be just as decisive as battlefield strategy. The German army had revolutionized combined arms warfare and understood well the challenges of maintaining supply lines. Their own offensives had often stalled when logistics failed to match tactical progress. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's initial advance had faltered not due to Soviet resistance, but because they could not sustain their forces across vast distances. German trucks broke down on poor Russian roads, while horse-drawn wagons, still accounting for 80% of German transport, could not keep up with the pace of armored divisions. Differences in railway gauge left tons of supplies stranded hundreds of miles from the front. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would later command the 47th Panzer Corps in September 1944, had written in July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes their weakness. Machines demand fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. They've advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History tells us what comes next: paralysis." German intelligence closely monitored American consumption rates. A single Sherman tank used half a mile's worth of fuel per gallon on roads, much worse across open terrain. An infantry division needed around 700 tons of supplies daily, while an armored division required about 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions pushing forward across a 60-mile front. The figures appeared undeniable. 12,000 tons of supplies per day, all transported 400 miles from the beaches, over damaged roads, and through a transport network the Germans had deliberately wrecked during their retreat. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who would soon serve as Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, calculated on August 20th that even if the Americans had unlimited trucks, which they didn't, and flawless roads, which they didn't, and suffered no mechanical failures, an impossibility, they still could not sustain Patton's pace for more than 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be broken, he concluded, not even by American industry. At 2 p.m. on August 25, 1944, inside a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Ayres of the Motor Transport Service addressed a room full of doubtful officers. The numbers were alarming. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in recorded history, moving at speeds no logistical system had ever supported. Traditional methods, rail transport, Scheduled convoys and depot distribution had completely failed under the pressure. "Gentlemen," Ayres declared, "we're going to build a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches straight to the front. Every truck will run 20 hours a day, no stops except for fuel and emergencies. We will move at least 12,500 tons every 24 hours. The concept borrowed from railroad terminology. A Red Ball freight was an express shipment given absolute priority. The Red Ball Express would follow that same rule, no delays, no exceptions. The plan's technical design went against every established German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way routes, one for loaded trucks heading forward, and one for empty trucks returning. Continuous 24-hour operation with headlights on, ignoring blackout regulations. No stops except for refueling or breakdowns. Convoys spaced 5 minutes apart, maintaining an average speed of 35 mph. Mobile repair units stationed every 50 miles, and military police checkpoints to pull any vehicle moving under 25 mph off the road. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commander of the Advanced Section of the Communications Zone, ADSEC, took charge of implementing the plan, an unprecedented logistical network that would soon prove the German calculations disastrously wrong. The projected figures were reviewed carefully. "We'll need 140 truck companies, and at least 5,158 vehicles operating at 90% readiness," came the assessment. That's impossible by any standard of logistics. Yet within just 36 hours, what seemed impossible was functioning in full force. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW, 2 1-Teuton trucks, known as the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells bound for Patton's forces near Melun, 300 miles east. The makeup of the Red Ball Express would have astonished German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who eventually ran the route, roughly 75% were African American soldiers, serving in a segregated U.S. Army. These men, who faced discrimination at home, were now sustaining the army of WW2I. America's most celebrated generals, the drivers, quickly formed their own culture. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They set their own road rules. Slow trucks pulled over immediately. Broken vehicles were pushed into ditches, and any truck moving under 20 mph was treated as an obstruction. By August 28th, German reconnaissance began noticing something extraordinary. Units from off-clearing 116 reported from vantage points overlooking the Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle movement, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all tactical caution. This broke every rule in German doctrine. Driving with headlights at night invited air attacks. Tight convoys created perfect targets for artillery. A single breakdown could stop hundreds of vehicles. Yet the Americans appeared unconcerned. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division personally observed the Red Ball Express on August 30th. His report to Army Group B expressed growing alarm. "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our understanding. Vehicles pass every 30 seconds, day and night, without pause. They ignore concealment, spacing, and all military logic. This is not strategy. It's industrial production applied to war." What the Germans failed to grasp was that American logistics followed a completely different philosophy. Where German doctrine valued secrecy, the Americans relied on scale. Where Germans conserved vehicles, the Americans planned for 20% breakdowns. Where Germans followed procedure, Americans improvised constantly. The Red Ball Express shattered expectations of what was logistically possible. In its first week, from August 25th to 31st, 1944, it delivered 89,939 tons of supplies, an average of 12,148 tons per day, over a 686-mile round trip. Nearly 6,000 trucks made about 1.5 runs daily, burning 300,000 gallons of fuel in the process. German analysts who captured these figures dismissed them as propaganda, but they were real, and the numbers kept growing. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express was running with precision unimaginable to German officers still relying on horse-drawn wagons for most of their transport. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western loading points. Each convoy averaged 67 vehicles, carrying 5 to 7 tons each. The 350-mile trip took about 14 hours, with only 2 hours allowed for turnaround. At any given time, roughly 5,000 trucks were in motion. Innovation became routine. When trucks broke down, about 1-800 per day, mobile repair units fixed them roadside. Mechanics used a triage method, 15 minutes to repair or push it off the route. Parts were salvaged from unrepairable vehicles, and engines could be swapped in under an hour using mobile cranes. When congestion occurred, alternate routes were created. Drivers used French buses for personnel, seized abandoned German vehicles, repainted them olive drab, and pressed them into service. They even built bypass roads using rubble from destroyed buildings. To the Germans, this apparent disorder seemed chaotic, yet it worked with astonishing efficiency. German logistics emphasized precision, maintenance, and procedure. The Americans favored adaptability and momentum. Instead of collapsing, the system gained speed. One of the most shocking aspects to German observers was American fuel logistics. The Red Ball Express alone consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel daily, more than many German field armies received in total. But the Americans never ran out. A parallel operation, codenamed Pluto, Pipelines Under the Ocean, had established underwater fuel lines across the English Channel, unknown to German intelligence. Fuel dumps were positioned every 25 miles along the route, with tanker convoys ensuring no truck waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. General Lieutenant Walter Warlimont noted from reconnaissance photos, "The Americans have fuel reserves larger than our entire strategic stockpile. They burn more fuel moving fuel than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This is not war. It's industrial overflow." The Red Ball Express didn't just sustain Patton's advance, it multiplied it. German doctrine held that an armored division could advance 20 to 30 miles per day under ideal conditions. Patton's forces, supplied by the Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1st, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in the morning, refueled by waiting Red Ball trucks at noon, and pushed another 32 miles before nightfall, a 67-mile advance in a single day. German analysts were incredulous. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reviewing reports in East Prussia, refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical limits make it impossible. This must be propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted American radio confirmed the reports. Even more unsettling, the Americans transmitted in the open, so confident in their speed that encryption seemed unnecessary. By September 5th, German intelligence had compiled extensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were devastating. Every assumption about American warfare required revision. The findings described a force that defied military convention. Americans discarded broken trucks rather than repair them, relied on stimulant-fueled drivers working days without rest, ignored camouflage entirely, and tolerated 30% equipment failure rates, yet their supply system expanded instead of breaking down. Field Marshal Walter Model's reaction reflected German despair. If these reports are true, we face not just a stronger army, but a stronger civilization. They do not hide because they do not fear. They waste because they have endless resources. This cannot be defeated with tactics alone. What the Germans couldn't see from their command posts was the human cost. The Red Ball Express drivers paid heavily for this relentless pace, operating their trucks for 72-hour stretches with little sleep, under constant pressure to keep the army moving forward. Many Red Ball Express drivers operated for 72 hours straight, hallucinating from exhaustion and the effects of Benzedrine. Accidents were frequent. Over 300 drivers lost their lives during the operation. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on damaged roads, or caught fire when overheated engines ignited. Despite these dangers, morale remained remarkably high. The mostly African American drivers, denied equal rights back home, understood they were making history. Every mile they drove, and every ton they delivered stood as living proof against Hitler's racist ideology. Captured German officers later spoke about the Red Ball Express with astonishment. General Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew the war was lost once we understood your supply system. You broke every rule, wasting fuel, abandoning vehicles, exhausting your men, yet you succeeded through sheer scale. You've industrialized warfare beyond anything we imagined. The psychological impact on German troops was immense. Wehrmacht soldiers heard the sound of American trucks all night long, an endless stream of engines symbolizing infinite resources. While German troops rationed 3 bullets per rifle, the Americans brought in millions. The noise alone became a form of psychological warfare. German engineers were equally amazed by the American vehicles. The GMC CCKW2, 1 2-ton truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, was a triumph of mass production. By war's end, General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these trucks, more than all types of vehicles in the entire German army combined. These trucks featured advancements the Germans had not standardized: full-time all-wheel drive, automatic tire inflation, waterproofing for deep water crossings, engines that ran on low-grade fuel, and reliable heaters for winter use. Even more revolutionary was the American approach to maintenance. While German crews rebuilt engines and rationed parts, the Americans replaced entire engines, or entire vehicles, without hesitation. Instead of relying on a few expert mechanics, they trained thousands of capable technicians who could perform most repairs quickly and efficiently. As the front line pushed east, the Red Ball Express adapted with speed that astonished German planners. When the route to Chartres became inadequate, new extensions appeared almost overnight. The White Ball Express connected Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond linked Cherbourg to rail transfer hubs, and the Red Lion operated between Bayeux and Brussels. Another system, ABC, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi, was launched soon after. Each route became operational within 48 hours of planning, while German logistics officers required weeks for similar reorganizations. The Americans simply painted new markers, assigned trucks, and resumed driving. The high number of African American drivers challenged Nazi racial ideology directly. German propaganda had long claimed that black soldiers lacked intelligence or initiative, yet these men were performing logistical feats the Wehrmacht could not match. The drivers themselves understood the irony. They knew exactly what the Nazis thought of them, and it motivated them further. Each successful run was a personal victory against fascist beliefs. Some German prisoners assigned to load Red Ball trucks were stunned to find African American sergeants directing operations efficiently, calculating load weights faster than German engineers, speaking better English than their captors' instructors, and treating prisoners with fairness despite the war. For many, it was their first real encounter with the falsity of Nazi racial doctrine. The Red Ball Express required massive infrastructure that German planners had considered impossible under combat conditions. American engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance centers, and constructed 8 temporary driver camps, all while the operation continued non-stop. One striking example came at Monte, where German forces had destroyed a key bridge to block American progress. The Wehrmacht estimated replacement would take at least 6 weeks. American engineers built a temporary bridge in just 14 hours, and Red Ball convoys were delayed only 8 miles using improvised bypass routes. German observers were astonished. There were no long meetings, no detailed blueprints, just direct execution. They watched infrastructure rise faster than they could destroy it. Even more shocking were the artillery supply rates made possible by the Express. During the reduction of Metz's defenses in September 1944, the U.S. 10th Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every shell, plus an additional 20% reserve. In contrast, German artillery at Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The Americans could fire for hours continuously, an advantage German commanders considered physically impossible. By late September, vehicle wear and tear reached severe levels. The average truck lasted only 10,000 miles, 1/3 its normal lifespan. Nearly 30% of vehicles were sidelined daily. Engines were replaced at a rate of 500 per week, and 10,000 tires were consumed weekly. Over 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned. Yet the operation never slowed. American industry had planned for such losses. New vehicles arrived weekly at French ports, and replacement drivers were trained in just 2 days before joining convoys. German intelligence reports estimated that the Americans destroyed more trucks each week than the entire Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet their supply capacity kept increasing. The United States had achieved something no other military had managed before: logistics faster than consumption. For French civilians along the Red Ball route, The convoys were a symbol of abundance after years of German-imposed scarcity. The psychological shift was immediate. Red Ball drivers, especially African Americans, often shared rations despite strict orders not to. Children gathered along the roadsides, and drivers handed out chocolate, cigarettes, and soap. The generosity contrasted sharply with the strict discipline of the German occupation. German intelligence soon noted the propaganda impact. French civilians now regard American victory as inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The same people who once tolerated occupation now openly resisted it. By early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its toughest test yet. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even this powerful system struggled to keep pace. The round trip now stretched over 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing from exhaustion, vehicles were wearing out, and German observers noted delays. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel reported on September 8th. American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speeds have dropped. This is our chance. But once again, American adaptability defied expectations. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized, setting up transfer depots halfway along the route, shortening runs to 350 miles, rotating drivers, building forward repair bases, and doubling the number of operational vehicles. By September 12th, supply deliveries had not only recovered, they had increased. What should have been a collapse became another triumph. To reinforce the system, the Americans launched an additional supply network that the Germans considered impossible: large-scale aerial delivery. C-47 transport aircraft began airlifting critical supplies directly to frontline units, each carrying 3 tons of cargo. On September 16, 1944, the Wehrmacht would finally grasp that the Red Ball Express was not just a convoy. It was the logistical embodiment of an industrial superpower in motion. Observers recorded over 900 transport flights in a single day, moving 2,700 tons of supplies by air. At its height, the Luftwaffe had managed only 300 tons daily to Stalingrad, considered an extraordinary effort. The Americans, however, used transport aircraft as freely as trucks, with no concern for escorts or fuel shortages. They accepted losses and compensated through sheer numbers. The Wehrmacht could not compete with this level of industrial capacity. The Red Ball Express functioned under a command structure that defied traditional German military hierarchy. Junior officers routinely made decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, only generals would approve. Sergeants managed operations larger than those under German colonels. This decentralized command puzzled German observers. By their logic, such freedom should have created chaos. Instead, it produced remarkable efficiency that rigid command systems could not replicate. By October 1944, as railway lines were restored, the Red Ball Express began scaling back. What was planned as a 10-day operation had lasted 82 days, transporting over 412,000 tons of supplies across 122 million ton miles. German commanders, now fighting on their own borders, reflected on its impact. Field Marshal Model concluded in his final report, "We were not defeated primarily by American tanks or planes. We were defeated by American trucks." The Red Ball Express demonstrated that logistics had become strategy itself. Meanwhile, American railroad engineers rebuilt 1,000 miles of destroyed French rail lines while the Red Ball was still active, laying new tracks faster than the Germans could destroy them, often with captured equipment. The final statistics were staggering. 82 days of operation, 412,193 tons delivered, 222 million ton miles, with an average of 5,958 vehicles, peaking at 7,000, and 23,000 drivers employed. Daily, the operation consumed 700,000 gallons of fuel, moved 40,000 tons of ammunition, 15 million rations, and 135,000 tons of medical supplies. Captured German officers, upon reviewing these numbers, admitted their miscalculations. They had based estimates on European precedents, multiplying their best performance by 3. Yet the Americans exceeded those figures tenfold. Beyond the numbers, the Red Ball Express shattered German confidence in their military superiority. Officers who once dismissed Americans as soft or overly mechanical witnessed feats of logistical strength powered by determination and mass production. German POWs, watching endless truck convoys, often stood silent, some even in tears, realizing that America could waste more than Germany could produce. Their worldview had collapsed, one truck at a time. The Red Ball Express also forced a racial reckoning within the U.S. military. The operation's success relied heavily on African American soldiers, who remained segregated and denied equal treatment. When General Eisenhower visited Red Ball operations in September 1944, he saw drivers who had been at it for 20 hours straight. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, later wrote, "The general said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.'" This moment contributed to growing pressure for military integration. 3 years later, desegregation began, driven in part by the performance of those very soldiers who had proven their worth under fire. The Red Ball Express was their battlefield, and they won it. For the Nazi racial theorists, the success was an embarrassment. SS publications quietly stopped referencing American logistics. The evidence contradicted their ideology too completely. Post-war, German military engineers studied the operation extensively, learning principles that would reshape global logistics. Volume can overcome inefficiency. Redundancy reduces vulnerability. Decentralized command accelerates action. Standardization multiplies capacity. Human endurance is greater than assumed. Former German Chief of Staff General Franz Halder later wrote, "The Red Ball Express proved logistics defines strategy, not the reverse." The Americans understood this. We learned too late. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, countless stories of heroism and endurance emerged. Corporal John L. Houston drove for 48 hours straight, delivering ammunition despite falling asleep at the wheel multiple times. Private Booker T. Washington kept driving a truck on fire to a field hospital, saving medical supplies vital for wounded soldiers from both sides. Such accounts revealed an American military culture focused on initiative and results, rather than rigid compliance. The Germans tried to replicate the system in Operation Greif during the Battle of the Bulge, using captured U.S. trucks, but failed immediately. German drivers couldn't maintain speed, their mechanics lacked spare parts, and fuel shortages crippled movement. Commander Otto Skorzeny reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944-45 was the Express's harshest test. Freezing rain, snow, and temperatures below 10 degrees should have halted operations. German doctrine deemed wheeled logistics impossible under such conditions. Yet the Red Ball Express kept moving. Drivers chained tires, poured alcohol in radiators, and pushed through blizzards that stopped entire panzer divisions. The system wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were ordered to study the operation. Their conclusions were unanimous. The Americans created a temporary civilization built solely to sustain armies, then dissolved it when done. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They built superior temporary systems in days. General Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg, admitted, "We invented Blitzkrieg but never solved its limitation, logistics. The Americans did. Through industrial excess we thought impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line. It was a river that drowned our forces. The operation cost the U.S. around $100 million, a figure that baffled German officers used to scarcity. But to Americans it was a bargain. The Red Ball Express helped capture 400,000 German soldiers, liberate France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shorten the war by 6 months. With each day of war costing $250 million, the Express paid for itself in a single day. Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, head of logistics in Europe, summarized it best. "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any earlier war, that would be ruinous. In an industrial war, it's acceptable overhead. After the war, the Red Ball Express left a lasting legacy. Thousands of its veterans returned home, founding trucking companies, designing interstate highways, and pioneering modern logistics. Firms like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by former Red Ball drivers who applied military lessons to commerce. Speed beats perfection, and constant motion wins. Historians today agree. The Red Ball Express was the decisive logistics operation of World War II in Europe. Without it, Patton's advance would have stalled, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and the Germans might have held their winter line. It validated a core truth of American military doctrine. In modern war, logistics, not tactics, determines victory. By September 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt had seen enough. After reviewing intelligence on the operation, he told his staff, "Gentlemen, this is beyond a military solution. The Americans have made distance irrelevant. We are fighting the last war." When an officer suggested attacking the routes, Rundstedt replied, "With what? They have 6,000 trucks. Even if we destroy 1,000, a feat we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We would need 200 aircraft just to match their production. We don't have 200. Behind the statistics were human stories, drivers pushing beyond exhaustion, mechanics repairing engines in freezing rain, teenagers lying about their age to enlist. These accounts spread across German lines, demoralizing troops who had believed American propaganda of weakness. They saw instead a nation that worked itself harder than the enemy's machines, voluntarily. In the end, the Red Ball Express became more than a supply operation. It became living proof of American endurance, innovation, and willpower, a logistical achievement so overwhelming that even Germany's best minds could only watch and acknowledge that the rules of warfare had changed forever. German soldiers could hear the convoys rumbling through the night, endless lines of engines that never seemed to stop. The constant noise itself became a form of psychological warfare. Reports from German units described hearing ghost convoys, sounds so persistent they broke morale as effectively as real supply lines. The awareness that American forces had near limitless supplies, while German troops were rationing their final rounds, caused deep despair and eroded fighting spirit. American psychological warfare units quickly recognized this effect. They began playing recordings of truck engines toward German lines when no convoys were operating. German forces often reported these phantom convoys as genuine, showing the psychological blow the Red Ball Express had dealt. By November 1944, as rail systems were gradually repaired, the Red Ball Express was officially shut down. Yet its innovations had permanently transformed military logistics. The concept of fast, high-volume, and resource-intensive supply chains became a defining feature of American military doctrine. The final brilliance of the operation was how quickly it could end. Within just 72 hours, an organization of 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, and hundreds of depots was dissolved. Personnel were reassigned, vehicles redistributed, and roads returned to civilian traffic. In contrast, the Germans took months to build smaller logistical systems and years to dismantle them. The Americans simply built what was required, used it efficiently, and replaced it with something better. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, many of its senior officers pointed to the Red Ball Express as proof that further resistance was futile. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel stated during interrogation, "When we realized your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon we had no defense against." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of Germany's most skilled commanders, was asked what surprised him most about the Americans. His answer was simple. Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks. The Red Ball Express revealed that the United States had mobilized its entire industrial power for war. Germany had been fighting not just soldiers, but the factories that built their supplies. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as a monument to industrial warfare. Cargo delivered 412,193 tons. Distance covered 122 million ton-miles average trucks in service daily, 5,958, 7,000 at peak. Drivers involved 23,000. Operation duration 82 days. Fuel consumed 57 million gallons. Tires used 180,000 tow. Vehicles lost over 5,000. Cost $100 million. German divisions defeated due to supply advantage. 47 war shortened by approximately 180 days. These Numbers tell a story beyond logistics. They mark the point when industrial capacity became more decisive than tactical skill, when logistics began to shape strategy itself. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony acknowledged an operation often overshadowed by frontline combat, but just as critical to Allied victory. Veterans attending spoke with pride about their contribution, how determination and teamwork had triumphed over fatigue, mechanical breakdowns, and harsh conditions. Most of these drivers were African American soldiers who served in segregated units, facing discrimination and lack of recognition during the war. Yet they were the ones who kept the Allied advance alive, driving at 35 miles per hour toward victory. The Red Ball Express proved that logistics was not just support. It was the main force behind success. It demonstrated that democratic industrial power could outmatch totalitarian organization. German officers who mocked American logistics were silenced by the steady roar of 6,000 trucks delivering 12,500 tons daily across 700 miles of liberated France. They had expected Americans to follow traditional European caution, to conserve, to advance carefully. Instead, the U.S. military unleashed a flood of supplies that overwhelmed German defenses. This triumph wasn't due to genius commanders, but to distinctly American qualities: mechanical skill, adaptability, overproduction, and the initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that in the Wehrmacht required approval from the highest ranks. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army relied heavily on the Red Ball Express, paid them the ultimate tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for defeating Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through breakdowns, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army wouldn't move. And without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers, segregated, denied recognition, but they won the war as surely as any rifleman. That truth stands as the enduring legacy of the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly. African American drivers operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way road to victory. They accomplished what German military science deemed impossible, sustaining an advancing army faster than theory allowed, maintaining momentum beyond human limits, and proving that in modern war, the side with the most trucks defeats the side with the best tactics. The same German generals who mocked American logistics later surrendered to the armies supplied by those very trucks. They finally understood that it wasn't tanks that defeated them. It was the trucks, the fuel, and the relentless rhythm of supply. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its influence has echoed through every modern military campaign since. It demonstrated that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest or the brightest, but to the nation that can deliver resources the fastest and the farthest. The highways of France still bear faint marks of its passage: worn roads, repaired bridges, and remnants of old supply routes. Yet the greatest monument to the Red Ball Express is the speed of Allied victory itself. Each day the war was shortened meant thousands of lives saved, and the Express shortened it by months. In the end, German officers learned a lesson that has defined warfare ever since. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and as they discovered in 1944, Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America's voice of victory, 6,000 engines roaring across France, carrying both democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to triumph. At a 1994 commemoration, one Red Ball driver recalled a captured German officer watching the endless convoys in disbelief. The officer said, "We prepared for your tanks, your planes, your ships, but never for your trucks. How do you fight an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rumbled past him every 5 minutes, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of modern warfare, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express turned supply into victory, proving that in the end, logistics, not firepower, decides who wins a war.